long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, the special edition.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 27, the It All Goes to Shit episode. I am your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, John Llewellyn. Hello, John.
Hi.
So before I get into all the fun stuff I've had this morning, I'm still questioning this host-co-host thing, because I heard another podcast where the guy introduced himself as a co-host and then his other person as a co-host.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if it's you're doing it together.
Yes.
It's the cohabitation, it's the coexisting. But I guess we ascribe to the old entertainment model where like a late night talk show where you don't have two co-hosts, you have a host and then you have a co-host.
Are you the sidekick? Are you the Nick?
Yeah.
Are you the Nick BarBeQuay to my Alan Havey?
I'd prefer to be the more of the Andy Richter, but in reality, I'm probably more of the Jimmy Kimmel to your Ben Stein or something like that.
I was going to say you'd be more of the Conan. You probably went to a better school than I did. You actually continued your education. I'm the fat one, but we'll do that.
Believe me, this summer This summer hasn't been the best for me.
Well, you did get married, and we all know that's like that's the doom for a man's waistline.
I think it's more job-related stress and things.
No, it's woman-related. No, I'm just kidding, people. Put your pitchforks down. No, anyway, I would say that I probably need to maybe question my responsibilities as a host, as I did what I did this morning. Why I'm in such a weird, punchy mood is I managed to accidentally delete all the original master files of our show. And I'm hopefully trying to get them back, but my backup drive actually decided to fail. And what happens is after about 10 minutes, it'll start doing something, and then it'll go, oh, it stopped responding, and then it's just... So I'm in a different room of my house, of my palatial Talking Bird estate.
Which is not to say that the estate itself is a talking bird. It's to say that that's where...
Yeah, that's where I got all my money from a talking bird. Anyway.
Yeah. So the masters are gone. There will be no Rudy Van Gilder edition of these shows. I'm
not going to be able... I still have the original calls. I just don't have all the notes that tell me how to get rid of all the mistakes and the dropped calls and the...
Sure.
Fixing the fact that I don't speak loudly enough or too loudly sometimes. So it's one of those kind of mornings where you just all they ever say is make sure you have a good backup, and you think you're covered. I think I should start looking into some more better backup stuff. But anyway, I think this is kind of unimportant background stuff when really we're kind of skirting around the big elephant in the room. We haven't even talked about this. I think I'm just going to spring this on you. I mean, I think
I'm fired, aren't I?
Are you? No, you're not fired, but...
All this talk about co-host and...
No, it's just...
co-host, and then you're like, well, I have to spring this on you. God, I'm fired, aren't I?
No, it's a hosty question. And the question is, and I'm putting you on the spot. Is Jonah Ray qualified to host MST3K or whatever this Kickstarter that Joel Hodgson has going? This is un-Star Wars related. This is
are any of us really qualified? I mean,
he's obviously a fan.
He's fine. He'd be fine. You know, as I understand it, right, for this Kickstarter thing, Shout Factory is going to be, you know, they have the rights to it now, so they're going to be putting out. I assume it'll be like streaming stuff online for a subscription fee, and then also putting out DVDs eventually. And I mean, I think the biggest question for me is why they're continuing to use the same two robots. You know, because they still want to. At least Hodgson still wants to use, you know, Crow and Servo, and I assume Gypsy won't be there, but I don't know. And, you know, he said that, well, you know, we've completely rebooted the cast before, so why not do it again? And I guess at the same time, you know, I think this would be a good opportunity to like completely refresh the cast, or, you know, completely cast as if robot puppets are actors, you know, but you know what I mean. Completely refresh the on-screen presences, and so I think if they're going to go with someone like Jonah Ray, you know, why not give him different robots to work with rather than try to like squeeze him into this Servo Crow dynamic that has, you know, 20 years working, and, you know, are we going to have to go through like them showing him the ropes again like they did with Mike, and, you know, there's all this other stuff that goes along with it. So I think if they're going to go with someone like Jonah Ray, or it's not, you know, someone who isn't Joel, then I think they should just go all the way and just get two different robots as well. Now, specifically about Jonah Ray, I could not tell you who would be qualified for that job. I have no idea.
So,
I mean, there's a whole generation. There's essentially our whole generation of people who grew up on that show, who, you know that show, it inspired them, who think they could do a good job, and it was a huge enough influence that, you know, even if whatever they do, whatever kind of writing they do or stand up or whatever as comedians that they do, it's influenced in some way by that show. So I'm sure there's a whole bunch of people who certainly think they could do it, but I have no real sense of who would actually be good at that job.
So I guess my question is, and I thought I was up on it, so is Joel just going to be executive producing this and writing on it?
That's my sense.
And not performing?
On the Kickstarter thing, I think he kind of left it open as to whether he would be performing or someone else. I mean, I could see him, like, who knows, maybe he's the mad scientist now, although that I doubt that based on his character's personality. I don't think that would work. But he kind of left that open-ended. But as soon as I saw the fact that it was open-ended, like that he even mentioned the possibility that other people might be hosting it or whatever, I just assumed that meant that someone else was going to be hosting it.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. I mean, I don't know what the status is with those guys. I thought him and Trace were still buddies.
I think they're still friends. You know, him and, you know, all certainly all of the cinematic Titanic people. So him and J. Ellis Weinstein and Trace Ballou and Frank Conniff and Mary Jo Pehl, and, you know, I think they are still friends, but or, you know, friendly with one another. They still, you know, are in contact with one another. I assume that, you know, they're all in some degree of contact or another with the Riff Tracks folks. Certainly they appear on panels together, and it seems like they get along okay. I think this might just be a question of, you know, the other folks deciding to move on to other things. I mean, because not all of them live in LA, which I think is where Hodgson is now. And so it would be based out of LA, and not all of them live in LA. And so, you know, it could be that they just have all decided that they're going to do other stuff. You know, Frank Conniff has He has is it a podcast or he has some kind of show that he does.
Really?
That he puts on.
I don't know.
Yeah.
No,
and then I did see on Twitter that he and Trace were going to be appearing somewhere riffing a movie just themselves, and so they have a hand in that kind of thing. But I don't know that they would want. I guess what it comes down to is I don't know that those folks would want to resurrect MST3K as it was. I think if they had continued to do Cinematic Titanic, or a similar idea but just with a different cast and different setup and a different premise, they might have been more on board with it. I also don't know to what extent they were even contacted ahead of time about this. If it was just like a heads up, like, hey, FYI, Shout Factory has the rights from, they got the rights from Best Brains now, or if they were approached and say, hey, would you have any interest in it? And they actively said no. I don't know.
It's kind of weird. There's so many strange little parallels to Star Wars.
Yeah.
In the idea that, well, obviously MST3K was a combination of a lot of creative things, much like Star Wars. But everybody thinks Joel was the impetus, much like the way they all think that George made he did kind of make the final decisions on things. But it's kind of I don't know. I think so much about how much entertainment now is just. I don't want to use the word retread, but it's all being brought forth from stuff that was popular when I was, from when I was a kid. And I'm starting, at first I was all excited. Like, oh, we're getting Twin Peaks back. Oh, we're getting Star Wars back. Oh, we're getting, all your bands that you liked are all getting back together. And it's just, It just feels like, I understand like on the financial aspect. I went and saw this band, last night. An English band called Ride, which they were popular in the 90s, and then I guess they call it shoegaze was the kind of the genre. There was like 5 or 6 bands in English bands, and they were the darlings of Melody Maker for like 2 years, and then all of a sudden everybody kind of turned on them, and then like they call like the Britpop kind of happened. So now a lot of these bands kind of had a premature end to their career. So now they've all reformed now, and they're hopefully making some money and stuff like that. And I always wonder if that's kind of what some of these things are. It's like, not necessarily a cash grab, or more of a thing. These are a time for these heralded creators. George Lucas, he got his $4.2 billion, but we all know that the money wasn't really important to him because he gave it all away.
Right.
But now it's this opportunity for guys like Joel to finally maybe make some money off of this thing that they probably they didn't make nearly the kind of money you think they made off of MST3K. But I mean I'll give it a try. I like to pick on Jonah Ray just because he's it's easy to, because he's been in like so many commercials and things like that. So he's kind of an easy target, and it's probably not necessarily fair because I haven't I can't really, you can't grade something until it's been turned in.
Right.
So it's
I would say, so I watched With Bob and David recently, and they even kind of commented on this phenomenon a little bit. I don't even know that they really did, but it was sort of this indirect thing where, so there's this complicated setup for this idea, but the premise is that, if someone says this particular phrase 3 times, then 72 virgins appear.
Right.
And so they do, and they show up, but instead of being, young women in the way that you might expect, instead it's a bunch of dudes who are just keep pestering them about like Mr. Show and like, oh, when are you guys going to do anything together? And hey, David, when's the Arrested Development movie coming out? Like that kind of thing. And it's right. So if they're surrounded by all these people who keep pestering them about doing this stuff again, like why did they? But they did come back and they did do some stuff together again, and they have, for the last couple of years. And so maybe it tie this back into Star Wars. Maybe it's similar to what we've been talking about with Harrison Ford. And how he kind of not actively ran away from like the Han Solo stuff, but it's clear
I
that
would say he did actively.
Well,
run away.
I mean, at the very least, it's clear that he saw Han Solo like, okay, that's a character I did for a couple movies. I had fun doing them, but I have this whole other career now. Maybe talk to me about those. I am not Han Solo.
Right.
Let's talk. Like, I want to talk about whatever movie I have out now. But then he did come back and he did agree to play Han Solo, even though he thought the character should have been killed off, 30 years ago. So maybe, and we talked about it, maybe it's just the challenge, the idea of, okay, you get to craft what this character looks like 30 years in the future. You get to do something, you get to play this character, but you're not just expected to play the same character that he was 30 years ago. You get to change it a little bit. And with the Mr. Show stuff, I think an interview with them, one of the things they said was, everyone involved in the show now has gone on to do their own stuff, and they have a better sense of like what to do now. And even, Bob and David, they have a better idea of like, okay, this is how I want to run a show, right? Bob Odenkirk is like, I don't have to yell all the time. I don't have to impose my weird view of what comedy should and shouldn't be based on being frustrated from Saturday Night Live, right? I can relax, and you see that in the shows that Odenkirk in particular is much more relaxed than he was. And so with Mystery Science Theater, I think Joel Hodgson, he's been touring, with this thing called Riffing Myself, which is sort of about him and his life in comedy and how he got started doing, Mystery Science, and then how that has sort of gone on and the ideas behind it. And, I think it's gotten to the point where, he probably has certainly with Best Brains no longer controlling it. And I mean, let's be honest, with Jim Mallon no longer having as much control over it, that's essentially the reason that Hodgson left the show, is because he didn't have as much say over the creative direction as he used to. And so now there's a chance for him to put that back into the show and do it in a way that might be more interesting to him now than it would have been 15, 20 years ago. And so, so that's the idea. But then, he also understands that, maybe him hosting those Turkey Day marathons on YouTube the last couple of years is fine, but if you're going to make it into a show and you're going to make it appealing for kids who are like 10 years old now, someone younger and with more energy and maybe a slightly different approach to doing things might be more interesting and might stir up more interest than just him doing it over and over again would.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, it's going back to that Bob and David thing. It's like I agree. Odenkirk is, I don't know, I don't really know the wherewithal, but I mean, I know that he was not happy with his Saturday Night Live experience, and not necessarily happy with the way HBO treated Mr. Show. And then he did some movies that I think were good movies, but didn't necessarily find an audience. So it was a little bit like, geez, what's going on? This guy's so great, but he's just not getting the respect. And I think, him getting that Breaking Bad, and Better Call Saul, I think that really, maybe that scratched an itch in him as a performer, that, he doesn't have to, not everything he does has to be a, cutting edge, perfect humor. I mean, some people have kind of...
Well, and everyone else aside from David Cross that he's working with. I mean, I guess in the original iteration of Mr. Show, there was him and David Cross, and Dino Stamatopoulos had some experience. And there might have been like maybe one other person who had a little bit of writing experience. But
Brian Posehn, didn't Brian Posehn write on the Ben Stiller show? No.
Yeah. I think just briefly, yeah. But for and certainly the performers had some experience performing, but for all the rest of the writers, he was basically like teaching them how to write sketch comedy, or at least he saw himself as teaching them all how to write sketch comedy, and like, this is how you put the sketch together, and this is what a good sketch is and what a not good sketch is. And now at this point, they all have enough experience doing either specifically writing sketches or just developing their own comedic personality. He's developing as an actor. You know, they're not like they're not just starting out anymore, right? And so Odenkirk kind of, and Cross too, could, you know, back off a little bit and say like, all right, we know that you're going to do whatever you're going to do. You know how to be funny in this sketch, so we're not going to breathe down your necks about it.
Yeah, and you said you hadn't watched the documentary.
No, I haven't seen the making of episode.
I think that's kind of. I mean, it's definitely, they kind of go in a bit to David and Bob's process about kind of like their comedy shorthand, and they talk a lot about it. But yeah, no, I actually was pretty happy with it, and I went in very skeptical, and that's not a ding on anybody. I mean, I still consider this appropriate conversation because our old friend of the show, friend of the Eagle Heart show, Jason Walliner, was he directed a lot of the what do they call it, pre-tapes? So I guess
pre-tapes, yeah.
I didn't know what that meant. I had to go back and look. I didn't actually quite understand. I was like, well, does he mean pre-tape?
Well, I think he means the stuff that was done on location rather than the stuff not in front of the audience.
I figured it out pretty quick when I saw that he was on locations and not not at the club. But you know, I don't know. It's some people kind of, like I said, some friends of ours have kind of dinged it here and there about saying it's a little too, like, quote, dad jokes. But I mean, I can't look outside of my perspective of like being kind of that age of that dad. Even though I'm not a dad, I'm and I'm in perfect dad joke. The nexus
demographics.
You know, I'm getting a little too old to be edgy, but I'm not so old where I'm like trying to steal kids' noses and stuff and thinking that's funny. You know, I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think it's something that a lot of comedians in particular have to deal with. You know, when they start out, they're pretty young. Most of them start out pretty young, and then, you know, they get married, and so now they have to figure out how to integrate, you know, marriage material into, you know, their developing comedic repertoire and personalities, and figure out how to make that, you know, everyone makes observations about being married, and then they have kids, and everyone makes observations about having kids. It's like, okay, how do I put my spin on this? How do I make this funny for me? You know, with this material that ostensibly like everyone has worked over already. And, you know, for something like Mr. Show or Mystery Science or Star Wars, right? I think that there's something about, there are two ways to look at it. One is, okay, how do all right, I'm forced to do this, and you know, either I won't deal with it, or I'll just, you know, I'll try to do it in the edgiest way possible and really, you know, I'll try to force feed it to myself. Or you can look at it as a real challenge and as something it can hold your interest and be like, oh, this is sort of an interesting thing for my brain to work on. This is, you know, I still love this thing that I do, and now here's a different perspective that I can bring to it. And so you know, you kind of rise to that challenge. But I mean, it's appropriate for this podcast because you mentioned the Eagle Heart connection, which is, you know, how we started out. But I think it's also, you know, a lot of the stuff that we've been reading about Star Wars too is relevant, and particularly there's a piece in Wired a couple of days ago that was mostly about Kathleen Kennedy, which I was, and Lucasfilm, which I was glad to see, because I think we talked about this last week. So many places are saying, oh, J.J. Abrams was given the keys to this franchise, and I'm like, no, he wasn't. No, he was a hired hand brought in by Kathleen Kennedy. And, you know, but it's this idea of, okay, how do you, you know, specifically for episode 7, you know, how do you recapture those feelings? And I talked about, you know, Lawrence Kasdan saying, oh, it needs to be delightful. Every scene needs to have this delight in it. And, you know, J.J. Abrams bringing his love of A New Hope and translating that into the new era and everything. But it talks in a broader sense too. It compares Star Wars to, say, Star Trek or other kinds of franchise, Marvel, I guess, that have these other kind of world building, universe building franchises. Where the difference with Star Wars is that they have the luxury of essentially jumping ahead 30 years in time. You know, it kind of, the article doesn't really consider all of the EU stuff, but, you know, they say whereas with Star Trek, other than differentiating among the TV shows and the movies, in a given season of a Star Trek show, you can really only add characters or add locations, right? You're not really jumping back and forth in time. Or if you're doing it, you're doing it for like half an episode or something, right?
Right.
Whereas in Star Wars now, right, they're 30 years in the future, and so they can fill in all of that other stuff in order to build out what this sort of new-ish conception of what this universe should be. And so it's that same idea of like, okay, rather than viewing the, for the creative people involved in it now, primarily, rather than having them come in here and saying like, okay, well, in the U that we have this series of books that says this character does this thing, but then the comic book said the character does that thing. So you need to manage to figure out how to fit yourself in between these different ideas of who Leia is, even though you might not like them, but that's what it is now, and kind of washing that away, or at least putting it over to the side. Now you might, I think that in part is what generates the interest among certainly the actors like Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher. But then, the people who are going to be actively involved in this, where like, oh, I get to sort of figure out what this character is now 30 years in the future, rather than, just sort of do the same thing over and over again.
Yeah,
and,
just
maybe
on.
exhibit some character growth, but it's, kind of marginal.
That was the funny thing about, you bring up Star Trek, and that was the weird thing about how Star Trek evolved from being a television, and I'm thinking the original, really. And so much, even so with the Next Generation, is that they would, establish this great story or whatever, and then invariably the movies would always have to deal with an aspect constantly, this idea of age, and having to address that they understand that time has passed. I mean, it's like,
right.
There was a whole that's Wrath of Khan. There's this whole subplot about, a lot of it is, the motion picture. It's all about Kirk, reassessing what he wants in life. And then they kind of reposit it again in Wrath of Khan. And there's like he has to wear like little half Homer Simpson half glasses at some points in the movie. And he has a birthday party, and, it's just like, right. And it becomes this thing where it's like, oh, really? And then when the Next Generation moves into the movie cinematic universe or whatever they call it, then the whole B story of that is all about the idea of like, Captain Picard, I never had kids, I got old, and it's just like, oh, right. It is that kind of, I mean, I understand that Star Wars they're gonna, although they've never really been good, they've never really had a thing about addressing time having passed. Like, and if I think about the only time they actually talk about time having passed, or refer to it in movie, is when Anakin Skywalker is coming up that elevator in Attack of the Clones and says, "It's been 10 years, Master." And it's just like, it's this thing where it's like, nobody really talks about, sorry, the dog's barking. And nobody talks about, oh, we've been at this Hoth base for 2 years, blah, 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 right. That kind of thing. It's going to be interesting to see how I don't know if are they going to sit there and go, oh, geez, Chewie, it's been 30 years since I've been here, or, right. or whatnot. I hopefully they'll come up with a more graceful way of kind of obviously addressing that time has passed without being kind of mired in these kind of these stories about aging that. Yeah.
And I would imagine that, I don't know what to call the non-film material anymore, because the EU, it carries this implication that you're talking about the Legends material, but
yeah,
it's still sort of the expanded Lucasfilm universe, whatever Star Wars stuff. So I assume they're going to use, you know, the novels and the comic books and whatever else to fill in those 30 years eventually. I mean, they're already doing that a little bit with Aftermath on that end of it. And the Shattered Empire, not that much, but, you know, they're still going to need a way. They're still going to need a way to convey that passage of time and the fact that these people have all had experiences in those 30 years. Like, they've lived lives in those 30 years. They're going to need to convey that in the movie, but do it in a way that isn't just, well, you know, 20 years ago I met this guy, and then, oh, that's someone else from my past, and oh, here's a thing that I learned 7 years ago, and you know, in Empire Strikes Back, you know, there's that line, oh, well, that bounty hunter we ran into on Ord Mantell changed my mind, which doesn't you never see that happen,
right?
Or, you know, Lando's line in Return of the Jedi is like, oh, he must have heard about that little maneuver, the Battle of Tanith. You know, that's something you never see, but it adds this kind of history to these characters of like, oh, they've done other things, and who knows when those were or what those entailed. That, you know, on the one hand, give you a sense of that character's history and background, but does it in a way that it doesn't feel like you're being lectured about, okay, here's the history of Princess Leia from right after the Battle of Endor to today. And so they're just going to... I have a pretty good sense that they'll do that okay. You know, that it won't be too much with that, but I'm sure that's something they're kind of aware of.
I mean, it would be nice if they could, you know, they could talk about, you know, they could refer to things and then not necessarily the book have to come out 6 months later. You know, right. I think that's the kind of the magic of Star Wars, and the fact that it feels a lot, at least when I was a kid, and there wasn't, you know, I never, in my mind, even though I kind of can be a stickler for like continuity and things like that in my head, I never once really thought that the comic books had a bearing on the movies. I was even at a young age, I was able to make a division, but it's like that idea where they don't have to show, like, you know, we don't have to see what a Gundark looks like to know what it is, to know that it was it's bad news, right, and it has ears or something like that. And if they can do a little bit of that without, you know, Disney deciding or Lucasfilm deciding that they need like a video game, 3 books, you know, what are those little figures? The Disney Imagination
Disney Infinity
figure for it. You know, it needs to have like a 5-issue mini-series about them. I mean, they did do a mission to Ord Mantell audio, and I think you can find it on YouTube. It was it came out, and it was, I forget who it was, that I think they might have used the cast from the I want to say they used the cast from the audio dramas, but I could be wrong. I could be wrong. And it was
sounds familiar.
You know, and it's like a 20-minute thing, and it wasn't that great, and it was kind of like that's where I get informed of that idea. Like, well, we don't have to know the behind-the-scenes story of every event. Yeah. And hopefully that part of that charming or whatever terminology that Larry Kasdan is using doesn't... Delight. Jeez, I am all over the place today.
No, that's fine. I wasn't saying it to correct you. I was just
no. I'm just like, I'm floundering. It won't be something that they, like, you know, dump a ton of it on us, because I know that they had already said that they pulled out some stuff that felt a little too like wink and a nod to the audience about the other movies, and that, you know, it's like, I mean, we are talking space fantasy movies, but and there is a certain amount of, like, I think we have 2 hours we're going to have 2 hours of story, because if they're saying that the final running time is like 2:08, and I think I've said this before, it's like, you know, 5 minutes, 6 minutes of credits, and then they have they always have like a 2-minute dialogue-free denouement if they're going to stick with that style, which they had for 6 movies. I can't imagine that he would you know, stick the landing and then go, let's have a conversation, you know, at the end of the movie instead. But who knows? Stylistically, it's kind of up for grabs. It's like, you don't want the more I see these little clips and I don't know if we'll get time to talk about this, and then the anxiety of like, oh geez, I don't want to see any more of this. I kind of just want to see this movie. I don't want to see any more behind the scenes. I don't want to see any more. It's like, will this be a stylistically different movie? Will it stay within, because we're already getting like tastes of the score, and from which ad, one of the ads had some real score.
I think it was the one in the ABC.
Yeah, and you have not watched that, am I correct?
I actually did break down and watch the minute-long trailer, but we'll talk about that.
It wasn't. Yeah, and already the music's a little different. It wasn't I'm so shell-shocked now, or gun-shy, or whatever metaphor I'm going to screw up using, about this music, because I keep going like, okay, well, I made peace with the plinking piano thing. Oh, no, that's not. That was just some guy. Oh, okay.
Right.
And then I hear this other thing, like, oh, blah, blah, blah. Oh, I kind of, oh, no, that's some other guy. And then I'm like, oh, okay. Oh, did you hear that commercial? Oh, that's John Williams. I'm like, oh, jeez. What am I doing here? I'm like, keep on trying to make peace with things, and then like, oh, don't make peace with it, because that's the real deal. I'm like, oh, well, now I'm confused. I feel confused. It's he's like, am I going to like this score, or am I going to wish that there was plinking pianos in it? Because I did hear a little bit in the commercial, and it didn't fill me with any grand excitement. It was like, oh, it's just some score, you know?
Yeah. So this conversation it's probably good to segue, since we've been talking about Lawrence Kasdan and this sense of delight and, working on coming back to this after all these years. He will eventually be leaving the Star Wars franchise, and sooner than I think a lot of people might have hoped or thought, in that the young Han Solo movie that he is co-writing with his son will be, he says, his last involvement with the Star Wars franchise, at least in its current iteration, I guess. But which I just kind of assumed that's what was going to happen, and the fact that he was writing it with his son was sort of a way for him to pass the torch on. But there are a couple of interesting. I don't know if this is necessarily a contradiction, but in one article where he had said that he wasn't that interested in doing the Han Solo movie, but that his family really wanted him to do it, and so he agreed to do it. If his son would write it with him. But then that Wired article I was just referencing. Apparently Kasdan was scheduled to work on this Han Solo movie first, that he had been talking to Kathleen Kennedy and George Lucas a couple of years ago about doing some other Star Wars movie based on one of George Lucas's ideas. And the way it's presented in this Wired article is, George Lucas basically had presented all of his ideas to Kathleen Kennedy, and that the two of them went to Lawrence Kasdan and said, pick one that you want to work on. And so he picked the Han Solo one. And then after that, he got asked to consult on Episode 7 and help persuade J.J. Abrams to direct it. So there's some room for maneuver in there where it's not necessarily a contradiction, but this idea that Episode 7 was sort of an afterthought, or at least that's not why he signed on to do this. And he basically signed on just to do that one Han Solo movie, and that was going to be it. And so, the fact that that's going to be his last Star Wars movie, there's this kind of emotional connection I think a lot of fans have, and the association they have between specifically Lawrence Kasdan and Harrison Ford, because he worked on, some of the Indiana Jones movies too. That, some folks I think are, considering that, if we didn't already think it was an end of an era, and if we thought, oh, it's reinvigorated, then this maybe does represent, this is like officially the end of an era in Star Wars. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I guess it's that whole torch passing thing. I mean, does that mean that if he's stepping down and he's doing this with his son, does that mean that when he steps down that his son will be involved? I don't know.
I'd be sort of curious about that too, because I know John Kasdan worked on Freaks and Geeks was like one of his earliest gigs.
Jake.
Oh, that was Jake Kasdan. Yeah.
Is he working this with? Is there
Maybe it is Jake Kasdan. I thought it was.
I was going to say, is there another Kasdan?
I must have gotten the name mixed up a minute ago. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's generally known for kind of screwball comedies. I mean, he did Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story, which is kind of like a sleeper kind of high concept comedy. But generally it's like, Bad Teacher and Sex Tape and Orange County, the one with Jack Black and Tom Hanks' son. Zero Effect, that was a good one. The Bill Pullman and Ben Stiller. It was kind of a weird it's kind of funny. It's like, I obviously wait.
So I'll stop you there. So I was correct. This is a different son. This is John Kasdan.
So he's not. Jake is not involved.
No. So John Kasdan he has a credit on Freaks and Geeks, but then he also from there he moved on and wrote for Dawson's Creek for a couple of years. And then his only other writing credit is The First Time, which I think I don't know what that is. It's a film with Britt Robertson and Dylan O'Brien from 2012. I don't know what that is.
All the big names,
but it looks like it's kind of like a high school romantic comedy. But then as a director, he has directed episodes for Californication. He directed an episode of Dawson's Creek. He directed an episode of Freaks and Geeks. And some probably smaller movies these are actors. I'm as all over the place as you are. So he's been an actor on Californication, playing a director. That's why I got confused. As a director, he's just directed The First Time, which I just mentioned, and then a movie called In the Land of Women, which is from 2007. It's Adrian Brody. Oh, I'm sorry, Adam Brody. So just look at IMDb for
John
Kasdan. That would have saved everyone a lot of time.
It's just like
rather than me trying to read his IMDb page.
I was just laughing because a mutual friend of ours had a kind of a weird interaction with Adrian Brody last weekend.
Oh,
well, not really. Not a personal thing. They just witnessed somebody like seeing him and like kind of asking him about one of his films in his oeuvre and going like, "What the hell were they thinking with that movie?" or something. And it's just when you brought it up, I was like, because I just rewatched the movie Predators that he's in, and it's like, whoever thought this guy would be like a good action, he's it
was very odd.
He's not out of shape, but he's very like, growing up with the kind of that Schwarzenegger Stallone idea of an action hero. It was kind of
I guess it would have been if Dustin Hoffman had gotten cast in Blade Runner.
Yes.
But taken to a more extreme because it's more of like an actiony movie.
Oh, I would have had it much more conversational in style.
Yeah.
Is that vocal? Yeah. Did I just do a proper vocal fry?
You might have.
I just learned about.
I am not. I will admit to not. I have seen the phrase vocal fry, and I am not totally clear on what it refers to.
I just opened up that Pandora's box yesterday, and it's kind of like I'm now obsessed with the concept.
Is it just like a raspy kind of like raspy?
Well,
voice?
They call it the Kardashian voice or something. They say it's.
I don't. I will also admit to not really remembering what any of the Kardashians sound like.
Right. Well, the best example would be like someone saying like, was like, oh, I wore a Donna Karan dress to the party, and then all of a sudden, it was so fetch, and you're just like, okay, that's vocal.
So yeah, it's kind of like dropping your voice.
Yeah, it's like all of a sudden, it's like you become the guy from the what's the Islands guy?
The Islands guy?
Oh, jeez, I'm so lost today. The Future Islands guy. And he's just singing like seasons change, and then he goes.
I have never featured. This is me not knowing what anyone sounds like. I know what they look like, but not what they sound like. I guess I might have just done vocal fry there myself. So so it's I guess John Kasdan may continue on. I don't know. I guess they would need to find something for him to do.
Now this is the movie. Now I'm getting myself.
If they ever wanted to adapt, based on his history, if they ever wanted to adapt like Lost Stars into a movie, he might be a good person to call for that.
Yeah, in the grand tradition of all of a sudden just completely forgetting who's doing what. Now, who's directing the Han Solo movie? Is that the one? The guys from?
It's the guys from the Lego Movie.
Okay, and which one is Wheats? Chris Wheats, the guy that did like Chuck and Buck, and isn't he involved in something? Or is he involved in the script stage? I think he's involved.
He was just a writer.
Okay.
I don't think they ever.
That's why.
I don't think he was scheduled to direct.
And there's two Wheats brothers, and I think one's a director.
And he
did
the screenplay for Rogue One.
Right, and then one guy's like, and his brother's the guy that was in like Interstellar and in the Hunger Game movie, the first one. I'm all over the place. Yeah. Don't ever come here for definitive news, and just come here for the views.
Scrambling to look things up as we talk about it, which is never worse. So you mentioned the TV specials. There was one on ABC. There was one on Disney last week, I guess. That it was like, special exclusive looks at episode 7, and the one on ABC. It was the what is that called? Shondaland. There's Shonda Rhimes, and then various actors from various Shonda Rhimes shows talking about how much they love Star Wars.
They call her show like when they have a bunch of her shows, they call it Shondaland.
Oh, I don't know if they do.
Or is that
I guess
just
technically it was the TGIT lineup.
Okay.
The hashtag TGIT lineup.
Sorry.
No, I'm going on. That's what Billy on the Street referred to, like the broad Shonda Rhimes universe is Shonda Rhimes.
Sorry.
Which I guess is also the name of her production company. So, right. So there was that one on ABC, which of course is owned by Disney, and then Disney on their own network had a similar thing, but obviously aimed at a slightly younger audience. And as you said, you watched them. I actually held off. I watched the ABC trailer that they aired, but only after you, Robert, had assured me that there wasn't really any spoilers in it. Just because I think I'm pretty much at the limit of how much I want to know about this movie, right? Like I think I've reached the point where like, I think I'm good. Like I know enough about this movie that I can kind of put together a picture in my head. Not that I'm going in with like expectations of what I want in this movie, but like, all right, I have a good enough sense that like I'm not going into this movie completely in the dark, but I don't know that I want to know much more.
And I'm kind of right there. I'm kind of having to like Andrew Lauder from the SF Barcast sent. I think he sent it to one of your other Twitter accounts. So I don't know if you got this.
My many and numerous Twitter account.
You did one that actually, it's the one. Anyway, it was.
Don't be a brick.
Yeah, it wasn't that. Was he? Did he send it that? Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
we got this. So he sent me this thing, and it was a picture of the back of a CD case, and I thought, he's just being helpful. But I'm like, oh no, somebody leaked. Somebody from the printing house leaked the CD case, and it's going to be the whole episode 1 issue over again. Because at the time episode 1 was heading to theaters, I worked in a record store, and so of course, because I had the power to order, I ordered a buttload of Phantom Menace soundtracks because I thought everybody's going to want to buy a copy of this. And I pick it out of the box, and I get spoiled right away because it says the noble end of Qui-Gon Jinn. And so I really...
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm very gun shy about this now, and I thought he was just being helpful, so I was like, well, thanks, but I'm not going to look at this. And then I get curious, and then I start to look, and I was on my phone, and I'm like, okay, I'll just read the first title. And it becomes like quickly evident as you read. The first 3 ones are very like, okay, this is the Imperial March or Finn's Escape. I'm like, okay, this is the real deal. And then like like by the end, it's like something about like taking off the earring or Padawan.
It was a
joke
parody. It wasn't really a parody, but it was a joke.
And I got roped in on that one pretty quick because it's totally, and it's a perfect joke because it really is playing with this kind of this weird anxiety that I mean, I don't know how you're going to deal with it. I mean, obviously you're going to be traveling, and you're going to be out of town. But I from what I gathered in this interaction that I had with a film critic on Twitter this week, is that it's I think Star Wars, I think The Force Awakens starts playing on the 14th in France.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big thing, and that's where it came. This is obviously before what happened in Paris, but we were talking. This guy on Twitter is a film critic, and I forget his name. I'm blanking on his name. He wanted to go to France to see it early, and I kind of just out of nowhere just kind of questioned. It's like, well, isn't it going to be dubbed? Because I always heard that there was a big tradition that the Star Wars movies were dubbed, and they had a lot of consistency at least in the original trilogy. They had a consistency with the actors that dubbed the voices, and then when the guy that was the French Yoda passed away, that they had actually, it was carried in the magazine at the time. But I guess the way it is that in the cities, it's got subtitles, and in the country they dub it. So
yeah, and so speaking of avoiding spoilers, I read something today that said that The Force Awakens, Disney is not going to enter it in the early award shows. They're not going to enter it for consideration in the early award shows because they don't want footage and copies of the movie getting out there, or even just like people talking about the plot as they, summarize the thing for the award show. So that's something they're very aware of.
Yeah.
And actively trying to counter that.
Yeah.
But or at least they're trying to control it, right? Because then even this trailer, the one that got posted on ABC, as you say, it wasn't, and having watched it now, there's not a lot in it that we haven't already seen. There may be a couple of shots, but it's shots that are still part of the same scenes that we have seen.
There's just something about, for something, it felt very the whole thing with Rey approaching, and I don't know if that's an edit or something where Rey is walking down a hallway and she's approaching a group of people, which it's obviously Princess Leia's or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I started to get nervous because then people were asking me like, "Oh, is it spoilery?" And and I guess my point about bringing up this idea that avoiding spoilers, that I've gotten personally so anxious about it, even though I don't know why. Because if somebody walked by and said, "Hey, Han Solo dies," like, is that really, if everything is hedged on this one linchpin of the movie, then that's a bad movie. It's like the whole idea where people are talking about Terminator Genesis when that came out, and the trailer gives away the fact that John Connor's character turns out to be a Terminator, and people go, "Oh, you ruined it," and it's like, well, if Terminator Genesis hadn't turned out to be such an awful, god awful movie, it wouldn't have mattered. Because I saw it this week. And
also, how do you as the audience know what, if there is a twist in the movie, like a surprise in the movie, how do you know that that's what it is, or how do you know that that's the only one that there is, right? I mean, it's. Yeah. I went back and I watched the trailer for A New Hope, just because I was curious to see how much got revealed there. And I mean, the first shot of that trailer is the throne room scene at the end, or the medal ceremony at the end. So they show you the end of the movie right at the beginning of the trailer. They don't explain to you how they got there, but you do see Obi-Wan and Darth Vader with their lightsaber battle, and you see the kind of voiceover says like, "Oh, Luke Skywalker is just a farm boy that he has to go on a mission to save the princess," and then you get "I'm Luke Skywalker, I'm here to rescue you," and you get all that. You don't get every story beat, and I don't think you see the Death Star at all.
Also
you get like the broad outlines of like, okay, there's there's this farm boy who's got to save a princess, and it has these laser swords, and then you have these X-wings, and yeah, that's kind of neat.
I mean, that's that book, A New Hope, I mean, or whatever. The novelization by Alan Dean Foster or whatever, was out for 6 months, you know.
Yeah.
So there was no, I mean, that totally is, I mean, that predates spoilers. I mean, I'm trying to even think when spoilers became a thing where people, I guess Empire Strikes Back was the first, you know,
yeah, maybe
movie you have to think about being a spoiler, because it was like, you know, nobody goes into the Temple of Doom thinking Indiana Jones might die. And, you know, and there really wasn't a lot of sequels. And of course there was the old, you know, what I'm trying to think of, another, like maybe The Matrix in 99 has a big spoiler in it. So people have to be concerned about that. There's a big reversal. It's kind of, yeah, I mean, obviously Empire and Jedi were kind of the first movies ever where people, like, I don't think people were really going into, like, in 1974 or whatever, going into The Godfather Part 2 and like, oh boy, no spoilers on The Godfather. You know, what's going to happen to Fredo? But and back to kind of what I was brought up in my mind about, you know, you're traveling and not being able to get to see the movie for a while. On the other side, I'm so kind of like jumping at the bit. You know, I was looking into the ideas like, oh, you know, they have press screenings. You know, does having a penny ante Star Wars podcast mean I could write them a letter? And I was like, I started writing the letter, and then I'm like, I don't even know what I'm going to ask for. And also, it's like, I don't really want to see it. I don't want to get the ticket and then find out I get one ticket and then my wife can't go. And because I really want to see it with her. So I actually, what I did though is, which I'm almost worrying if I'm setting up ourselves for disaster, but I found out that there's an independent movie theater in my neighborhood that's actually playing the movie a day early. Oh, wow. Because it's conventional projection, I think. So I went and I got a ticket. It's like they've been doing these kind of things where you can, so I get to go see it on 7:00 on the 17th instead. Yeah. And then, but I still have tickets to see it at 6:30 on the 18th. And then I have tickets to see it with my in-laws on that Sunday. And it's like, it's going to be the 2D the first time I see it 2 times, it's going to be 2D. So it'll be interesting. I won't get to see all the IMAX stuff until the
I still haven't decided if I'm going to see it in the IMAX 3D or any other kind of 3D.
Yeah, it's kind of...
I'm debating. I guess I want to see it first in the 2D, and then if I like it, I'll see it again. But if I am just lukewarm on it, then I won't spend the money, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem. It's kind of like, well, I've already committed to seeing it 3 times. It might be really... If I walk out on the 17th going, it's going to be like it's going to be hard, because my initial reaction will be like, screw this, I'm not going. But then there's going to be like other people like, we already bought the tickets, we're supposed to go with my family kind of thing. And it's just like, yeah, I'm just going to sit here and grouse. But yeah, I know I have this anxiety where it's like, I think about, you know, we talked a little bit about this Daniel Fleetwood, who passed away actually last week. That was his, you know, it was his final wish to see the movie, and he obviously didn't see a final version of it. I mean, he never, you know, I think, and they did the smart thing where they just released the fact that, you know, he had seen it. It wasn't like a thing like, I saw it and I loved it, or I saw it and, you know, whatever. It was just like, it was just reported that he had seen it, which was his wish, and I mean, that's a good thing, but it's like, I can kind of, that's, you know, I wonder if that, like, what level of, you know, nervousness that guy had going into it. I mean, obviously, I can't even fathom what it would be like to be facing your own mortality. So I'm going to table that. But this idea that, you know, he's only going to get to see it once, and it's like, I don't know. I'm getting a little off topic here. I mean, I'm not comparing my anxiety to a person who's passing away's anxiety, because it's a whole different ball game. But it's a little bit like, yeah, we're at this point where like we're doing a podcast about Star Wars, but we're not really super excited about getting a lot of new information about the movie that we're talking about. So we can definitely, maybe I should I should just shut up because I'm starting to ramble. But
yeah, but I mean, there is this balance that a lot of people are going to have to strike, and on the one extreme you have like the casual people, or or at least my wife, who's like, yeah, I'll go see it with you, but she has no interest in seeing it more than once, and she has she doesn't care if we see it on opening day or not. And then you have the folks who are already like, oh, I'm gonna buy some tickets and I'm gonna go see it every day for a week, and then I'm gonna do the marathon showing of all 7 episodes. You have that extreme too, but it's for everyone else. It's not clear to me. I was going to say, it's not clear to me who they're marketing, how they're directing this marketing, but realistically, they have to sort of try to account for everyone, right. Those 2 extremes, and then the folks in the middle. And to that extent, I mean, I think they're doing fine. A lot of what people would consider spoilers that have gotten out there are other sites who, have rumors, or they have sources on the inside who are leaking stuff that might or might not be true. But in terms of what actual Disney itself has put out there, I think they've been fine in terms of walking that line of how much do we reveal to people and how much do we not reveal to people, and even that, even the fact that they're acknowledging this idea that like, yeah, people don't want spoilers, they don't want to find out every part of this movie before they go see it. Honestly, that's a relatively new concept, and that. Yeah, that's something that is, I'm sure, inspired in part by what happened with Empire Strikes Back. But at the same time, it took a long time for that to catch hold, right? I wouldn't even say that's like an internet phenomenon. That's because the internet was around a long time before that concern sprung up. It's really only in the last, probably 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's gotten really extreme. Like people,
it's accelerated a lot, but yeah, it's certainly not more than 10 years old, and probably not that much more than 5 years old.
Yeah, it becomes this like in a world where we have tons of things we can worry about. We've created new anxieties now. It's the idea of being spoiled for something, and it's kind of almost embarrassing for me to be just a part of that. It's kind of like part of me just wants to go onto a site and read the whole plot and just be done with it and kind of just whatever, It's like it feels weird to have some, basically the idea that some troll on Twitter or something could spoil it for me, and then even if I look at there's some disclosure and then I'm just like, oh, whatever, there's always going to be a part of me is like, well, are they trolling with the truth, or are they trolling with the fake stuff? I was on Facebook, they have all that tailored ads and news. They have a news story sidebar now, and there was a spoiler. There was a big Star Wars spoiler.
Oh, really?
About Princess Leia. And I was just like, I wasn't even looking. I always think it's like, if I can stay off of makingstarwars.net, I think.
Yeah.
If I can stay off of there, then I'm not going to get spoiled. But no, the sidebar is like, oh, this is, she's not called Princess Leia in the new movie. She's called X. Right. And which I won't, I'm not going to get into it. But
yeah, it's not even, I know what you're talking about. It's not even like a major... Right, when she's called, you're like, oh, who cares? But it's like, well, why is that such a thing that needs to be revealed to people?
Yeah, it's that idea that now that we're less than a month away, where it's become part of the active news cycle, so therefore you're dealing with people that don't value it, and and that's their prerogative. I mean, there's a lot of other things going on in the world than Star Wars to think about. But then like you get these kind of flippy newscasters like, well, obviously looks like old Harrison Ford is finally hanging up his blaster, and it's like, what? It's like, wait a second. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, I thought everybody knew he was going to die. And I'm just saying that not because I know he's going to die, but for a fact, just because I think that's the number one rumor, which has, I've heard very little evidence past the fact that he wanted Han Solo to die back in 1983.
Yeah. So, and a lot of this information that's coming out now is coming from, at least online, it's coming from an issue of Entertainment Weekly that was released. I always said a magazine issue that was released recently that came out last week or maybe 2 weeks ago. Empire magazine has some stuff. The Wired article I mentioned, and so the print. They're doing print media. The print media, interviews and things have started up now that I guess we didn't mention this at the top of the show, but we are a month away from the movie.
Yeah.
And then in a couple weeks, the talk show circuit will start up. But so we learned a little. They revealed a little bit more about Maz Kanata, just in terms of like her age. I guess they still didn't reveal that much about her, but just that. Her age basically, and how that might relate to her character and what her character knows and has seen and experienced. Starkiller Base, but that was basically what everyone knew. Like, oh, it's just the next iteration of the Death Star. Like, right. Yeah, okay, we could figure that out from the poster. But then so after the spoiler discussion, I don't know how much you want to talk about this, but Andy Serkis talked a little bit about his character, Supreme Leader Snoke, and I thought it was kind of interesting. I guess this isn't a spoiler, but he still doesn't know what his character looks like. Like
that's awesome.
I guess they had concept art that they kind of were working off of, and he worked with them to kind of develop what this character might look like, but they were still revising that even as he was acting and even after he shot a scene, and so. There's some maybe spoilers in this quote too, but I think it's interesting. So this is from the issue of Empire, although I think he talked about it in Entertainment Weekly too, but this is from Empire. So he says, it's quite an unusual situation. I worked specifically with Donald Gleason and with Adam Driver. My first day was basically standing on a 25-foot podium doing Lord Snoke without the faintest idea of what he looked like, or in fact who he was. I was very high up, totally on my own, away from everybody else, but acting with them. And then there's another quote where he says, we use sort of a Congolizer method. I don't know what that means, of having sound come out of speakers to give a sense of scale and distance for the character. And then in addition to that, he says that, Snoke is very powerful, but very vulnerable at the same time, that he's scarred and disfigured. And I think this was in Entertainment Weekly that he was specifically asked whether this was a character that could have been done with prosthetics. Of course, he's going to say no because he is Mr. Motion Capture, and he's not about to put himself out of work. But so he said no, but he alluded to something about the character's physical appearance that sort of necessitated it. Something about his eyes, something about his face that couldn't be done with prosthetics. That would make prosthetics kind of impractical to do, which is interesting, but at the same time, they can do a lot with prosthetics, and so it pushes it even further in your imagination of like, well, what could this be if it's not something that could be done with prosthetics? And again, he's a big advocate for using motion capture acting because it gets him more work, and so it may not have been that impractical to do with prosthetics, but. For some reason, I thought of it's funny we mentioned Predators earlier. I was thinking of Predator in that, and the prosthetics done for that character, where the jaw essentially opens up in a completely different way from what a human's jaw does. But they managed to make that work, and so just thinking about so what do the eyes do that they're that different that they have to use motion capture. Rather than prosthetics, and I don't know, and it could be that there was a rumor that Snoke was very serpent-like, and so maybe that is part of the reason that you don't get that quality of movement with prosthetics that you would with motion capture. But who knows?
Yeah, it makes you wonder if all of a sudden I had this thought. There's that. I haven't watched this or read this thing where there's this theory going around, this joke theory that Jar Jar Binks was the ultimate Sith Lord.
Yeah.
And they talk about this idea, well, he's got a very specific eyes, and I'm thinking eye stalks, it's like, no, it's going to be like some battle damaged Jar Jar Binks character up in a throne.
Right.
It's never going to happen, but it's just like, God, could you imagine just walking out and it's like, oh, really? He's like a disfigured Gungan or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, we couldn't do that with practical effects. We had to we had to hire Andy Serkis to do that.
Yeah. What if it's Boss Nass?
Oh yeah, Brian Blessed. Brian Blessed would be telling everybody and his dad that he was doing it.
Yeah, that's true.
It makes me wonder. It's like, did you ever? Well, you probably didn't because you're probably too young. But did you ever watch the original Battlestar Galactica?
Yeah, a little bit, not all of it, but I definitely watched episodes here and there.
Well, there was this whole thing with they had this bad guy, which they kind of dropped after the early thing with this. They call it the Imperious Leader, and the Cylons, the bad guys, would come into this room, and there would be this dude in a super high chair, and the chair would turn around. I wonder if that's what it's going to kind of be like, that thing where it's just going to be they're just going to keep reporting to this guy.
Yeah. Does it get like the chair is just going to get higher and higher?
Exactly.
I mean, and this is where maybe we know too much information now, but we already know that Benicio del Toro is playing the bad guy in episode 8. So what does that mean for any of the bad guys in this movie? Like, does that mean? I assume that means at least one of them won't survive, but who is it? And at what level in the hierarchy is Benicio del Toro's character? Is he above Snoke? Is he still below Snoke? And so that's where like having all this information, being inundated with all this information, I wouldn't say it's ruining the experience, but I already kind of know going in like, all right, so some of these people are going to die, and we already know from Gwendolyn Christie talking about Captain Phasma, like, all right, I shouldn't expect to see her that much. She's more of the Boba Fett mysterious person over in the corner character than like Darth Vader.
Right. Yeah, it makes you think. I mean, we couldn't do this show if we had gone this way, but there's people that still haven't even seen the trailer, and they consider themselves fans. They want to be so unspoiled. There's a guy, and I don't know what his Star Wars views are. On the /Filmcast, they argue about this a lot, about trailers and spoilers and stuff. And I guess this one guy on the thing, he refuses to even see the trailers, so he just goes in completely like, when they pick a movie that they're going to review that week, he goes in having never even read a description of the movie. And in theory, I love that idea. I wish I could be that kind of person, because my brain is. I feel like I'm the kind of person who constantly searches for information on a topic, even when we've gotten we've got consensus, and I'm like, no, I'm going to keep reading about this. It's like I don't ever know when to stop, and I think that's what my issue has been. It's like I try to be like, oh, I'm not gonna read this thing about Snoke because I had avoided it. But then when you said you were gonna say it, I'm like, oh, bring it on, because I'm like, it's like I'll listen. It's like that kind of thing, and now I don't feel like I don't regret hearing this stuff, but then it's kind of like, what would it have?
Yeah, I mean, it's that balance of like, I like thinking about, the whole reason we have this podcast is in part because we were both like, wow, I've been thinking a lot about Star Wars recently. Like, I want to keep doing that. So, it's something that I clearly spend time thinking about and, kind of like thinking about on my own. But I kind of want to think about it on my own terms and not have someone else dictate to me like, all right, this is what you should know, and this is how we're going to frame your thinking right now.
Yeah.
At least not beyond like the actual thing itself, right? Like obviously the movie is going to frame how I think about it, but But so speaking of which, also they revealed the Constable Zuvio character, which they didn't really, because the toy we already seen the toy, but we saw the, I guess, the real version, or the what he looks like in the film. Did you see that, or did you?
I saw it. Like
I actually like this a little bit better than the toy version, which I would hope I would. But the color scheme's a little different, and I actually like it's kind of this like purplish and greenish color scheme or turquoise or something that I like. And it's Constable Zuvio with 2 henchmen or whatever they are. The henchmen have these slightly different helmets than he does, and those kind of look neat. And there's just this kind of worn and weather-beaten look to their uniforms that, again, it like okay, right? They've gotten the kind of used universe quality to this that's going to help make this whole thing work.
Yeah, I think it's I'm kind of neutral about when they want to introduce aliens. I mean, because that's the fun. I mean, it's always that's kind of like they're not really they're giving you a very subtle, and we don't even know how big of a part that he's going to have. Actually, He's one of the few guys that you can usually pick up at a Toys R Us or whatever pretty easily. Right.
He's available.
He's a peg hanger, as they say in the toy world. But it's I honestly don't think he's going to be a big part of anything, because I get the feeling this Jakku thing, when things start to happen in this movie, it's going to be one big battle, and then they're going to be off that planet, kind of. I mean, I don't know. Again, I'm spoiling again. It's that kind of cyclical thing where it's like, oh, I'm not going to spoil. Now I'm going to spoil.
Yeah.
So, did you want to get into? Did you finish Battlefront the book?
I did, actually. I did finish Battlefront. So I read Battlefront over the course of the last week or so. This is the tie-in to I guess I should say I read Twilight Company, which is the book tie-in to the video game Battlefront, which just got released today. And so Twilight Company was a tie-in novel, as Star Wars tends to do tie-in novels for their video games, and so this was one of them. I mean, overall, I liked it. The writing quality was pretty good. I thought I had read some other reviews of it before I read the book myself, and as I'll get into in a minute, some of the things they disliked about the book, I didn't mind as much, because I found it helpful to keep in mind just what kind of video game this book ties into. In the sense that I think a lot of, and I'm assuming that this was intentional. It may not have been, but you're introduced to many new characters over the course of the book. Not all of whom last through the end. You have people come and go in and out of the main character's life, but that's sort of how the game like Battlefront works. Where you have a lot of people playing the game, and they all jump on a server, and you might know some of them, and you might not, and then they leave, and you find a new group of people to play with. Whereas like the Karen Travis Republic Commando novels, it's the first person shooter, but you have your little squad that sort of goes through the game with you, the computer assisted squad or whatever that is. And so, those books are all about, a particular squad or particular group of characters. And so, I think a lot of elements of this book reflect the fact of what kind of game Battlefront is. So just as in Battlefront, you can play as either I said rebels, but it was because I was trying to say rebels and rebellion. So you can play either as the rebels, or you can play as the Empire. And so in this book, you have primarily the rebels' point of view. They're the main characters, but there's also a stormtrooper who, you get their point of view for a couple chapters here and there. And in that sense too, it reminds me a little bit of Aftermath. This book doesn't jump around in time and space quite as much as Aftermath does, or at least if it does, you get a lot of different locations, but it's mostly the same group of characters. Whereas Aftermath, okay, here's a chapter showing what's going on Cloud City, and here's a chapter about, Han and Chewie in hyperspace. So this book doesn't do that quite as much, but it does it. It still does it, and I haven't seen this book get as much of the criticism that Aftermath got for doing that. And so I don't know if that's just people adjusted to it after Aftermath, or just the way it was carried out, the way it was actually implemented and done was just done in a slightly better way. And you also don't have, the first person point of view throughout the book too, which I think maybe it was the combination of that and jumping around that maybe people kind of reacted to with Aftermath. But anyway, back to Twilight Company. So you get a couple cameos from what I would call, the famous Star Wars personalities, the names, So Darth Vader makes an appearance. Princess Leia, I can't remember if Princess Leia makes an appearance. So she might.
When is
very,
this,
very briefly.
When is this set?
So it's set kind of. It starts a few years. Well, really, there are some flashbacks in it as well, but it takes place over the course of probably 2 to 3 years. I would say 3-ish years for the main story, and the Battle of Hoth takes place maybe 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through the book. So it takes place post Battle of Yavin, I think. And then from there up through just after the Battle of Hoth. So that time period, right? The original trilogy.
Okay.
But again, you do get a couple of flashbacks for the main character, several years before Battle of Yavin and things like that. But so you do get some cameos. Han Solo makes a cameo, although he's not named. He's just described as a smuggler or a freighter pilot or something, but it's Han Solo. And again, that also reflects Battlefront, where Han Solo's in the game, and Boba Fett and Luke and the Emperor, whatever, but the bulk of it, those are mostly just kind of cameos, right? The bulk of the game is
I think
other stuff.
They call that, I forget what they call that, heroes. It's you have to.
Right.
It's only available at certain points of the game, and it's a free for all where it's an icon appears on the battlefield, and if you can run up there and get it, then you activate it, and then you have this super powered character for 2 minutes or whatever. And I haven't, I said, my copy is still sitting at the Best Buy because I haven't been able to get over there to pick it up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one thing I thought was interesting is one of the characters, they pick up this character, Governor Chalice, who originally showed up, I think, in the Levers of No, it was the Bottleneck short story that I think I reviewed last week or the week before. I can't remember.
It was last week.
Yeah, last week. But she was Count Vidian's assistant. So A New Dawn, I think, really a lot of stuff is kind of emanating from that story. And Count Vidian was, the Empire's efficiency expert, essentially, and this woman was his assistant. And then at the end of that Bottleneck short story, she gets sent to a planet to sort of oversee things there, and this is some years later, and so she's been kind of moved around a bit, and she ends up on this particular planet. Can't remember the name of it. It's to sort of get her out of the way. It was a demotion that she ended up as governor on this backwater planet. But she ends up. This isn't really spoiling anything, but she ends up defecting to the rebels, and it's sort of interesting because it shows up in A New Dawn. I think it shows up in New Dawn, and then it shows up in the Levers of Power short story. This idea that one of Count Vidian's mottos or his sayings was that always be on the side of what is going to happen anyway. And so if you know that, if you don't have that backstory, you're like, oh, this is just a governor defecting, and she sort of explains that defection enough that it's satisfying if you haven't read any of this other stuff. But if you have, and you kind of have that in the back of your mind, and you have that connection to Count Vidian in the back of your mind, it does add a little bit of something to oh, maybe this is why she defected, or how that's going to translate throughout the rest of the story. But then she also references the character of Sibo from Rebels, who is the Rhodian who was friends with Ezra's parents, and then he got like a cyber implant, like Lobot, all this stuff. So she actually references him too. So that was kind of, a little Easter egg for Rebels viewers. You jump around to different planets, different campaigns, different battles on different planets, just like you do with Battlefront, how you can be on Sullust or Jakku or Hoth or some of the others. It does end up the book does end up on Sullust for a while, and it also, one thing it also does is I'm jumping around here a little bit in my notes, but it also creates it leaves open the possibility. The book leaves open the possibility that you had some clone troopers who became stormtroopers. So as I said, there's this stormtrooper character that you get her point of view a little bit, and she's on Sullust, and there's another stormtrooper in her regiment that she thinks might have been a clone trooper, and you never get confirmation one way or the other, but it just kind of leaves that door open that, okay. And I think this goes back to one of the episodes from Rebels this season where Captain Rex talked about kind of what happened to all of the other clones. And he says, I think some ended up training the new stormtroopers, and this leaves open the possibility that some clone troopers just stayed on and kept fighting as stormtroopers, at least in that kind of first generation of stormtroopers. So, you'll notice that I haven't really said anything about the plot itself. There's some plot in there. It's mostly that you're with Twilight Company, who are the soldiers in the Rebel Alliance who take on the toughest jobs, that they helped push the rebellion into the Mid-Rim territories after the Battle of Yavin, and then the Rebel High Command decided that they wanted to retrench and just kind of safeguard the territories that they already have, the planets that they've already secured, rather than try to keep expanding. And so Twilight Company is like the last line, the rear guard for that withdrawal action. And so they're basically taking up the rear as the rebels retreat out of the Mid-Rim a little bit. So it's just kind of them on different planets, and their objective is slightly different on each planet. And then along the way, they kind of develop their own. After Hoth, they kind of end up cut off from the Rebel High Command, and they're not getting many orders, obviously, because Princess Leia is off on Cloud City, and then everything's happening with her, so she's out of the loop, and you don't really know what else is going on with the rest of High Command. And so Twilight Company then has to sort of come up with its own plan of attack, its own strategy, and so that drives the rest of the plot. But it's also, I think, a reflection of the main character. So the main character is this guy named Hazram Namir, who is a sergeant, I think, and he didn't join the rebellion for any particular idealistic reason, to fight the Empire or whatever. He just kind of fights, like he just likes fighting for stuff, and he has experience. He has a lot of fighting experience for different causes on his home planet, and it just kind of goes from thing to thing. And so he ends up, his goal just ends up being kind of helping his friends in Twilight Company achieve their ideals and keep the squadron surviving and keep the company surviving. Just kind of focuses on the here and now mostly, and just, all right, what's our objective today? Let's just do what we can to achieve that objective and keep people alive. And if we have to sacrifice a few people, that's okay, because the Twilight Company itself will keep surviving and keep moving on. So it's not the most exciting story. I'll say, with the Republic Commando tie-in novels, maybe not with the first one because Revenge of the Sith hadn't come out yet, but at least with the rest of them, there was this inherent tension because you knew Order 66 was coming, and you knew that you have these clone troopers, and then you have the Jedi who work for them and who live with them and do all the stuff with them, that at some point that's going to have to change. And so there's this kind of inherent tension in all of these relationships that Karen Travis was building. Whereas with Twilight Company, there's nothing that we know of, at least, big like that on the horizon, and so there's not really a point towards which this story builds. Right, this story is just it's not like guiding us on the path towards anything, at least not that we know of yet. It's possible that they write more of these Twilight Company books, or that it gets folded into some other storyline later on. Who knows? I would say it's a little more like the Wraith Squadron books, which is, but not even the Rogue Squadron books, which the Rogue Squadron, even though most of the characters were new and original, there was at least that kind of nominal tie-in, that connection to the movies, where Rogue Squadron is from Empire Strikes Back, and Wedge is still around, and occasionally Akbar shows up to talk to Wedge. But the Wraith Squadron was pretty much on their own. The Wraith Squadron books, those were a little more like Mission Impossible kind of things, kind of missions. Whereas this is more, if science fiction and fantasy, or if science fiction, you have on the one side your fantasy space operas, and on the other side you have your kind of military sci-fi. This is pretty firmly in the military sci-fi camp. And then you also, I know you have been asking me about, the novels, Robert, and, what's a good one to read. I don't know that I would recommend this one to you, because I know that you want the stories of, the main folks, like the heroes. You want Han and Leia and Luke and whomever else, from the films. And there's, like I said, apart from the brief cameos, there's really no one from the movies in this.
Yeah, and then I noticed that I was at the store and I saw it, and it's been released in hardcover.
I think they're still doing that with all of the the Del Rey Star Wars novels, which I don't understand.
It's so it's such a prestige. Well, I mean, I don't know how prestigious it is, but it's such a high. I assume that they're sells for $25 or something like that. If you go to Barnes and Noble or whatever, and I always thought of those tie-in books as being like paperback quickies. It was kind of like They did a book for when they did Star Wars Galaxies, like Ghosts of Dantooine or something like that. Mm-hmm. And they were just like paperback quickie things you could get for $5 and a nice little tie-in with the game. I mean, it's probably just a function of this, this onslaught of marketing for Battlefront, where it's they've got the commercials and the. Have you seen the one where the people disappear and stuff?
Mm-hmm, the one with Anna Kendrick.
Yeah, Anna Kendrick. Which is really strange if you watch that, because it's there's two versions of it. There's one where Anna Kendrick's making a sandwich and then she looks at her butter knife and goes into it. And then there's a version where she just picks up a butter knife and disappears or something like that. And you're just like, what? Yeah. What? Yeah. What? So, okay. But yeah, I know I was at and maybe that's just me. Maybe that's just my inherent frugality, kind of being like, I'm not gonna take a risk on a book like that. I need value for money. I was at Barnes and Noble, and there was a guy in there, and I was kind of just absent-mindedly flipping through stuff. And this guy was a huge Star Wars guy. He was just like, I need this book and that book, and he was just she was just loading him up on stuff, and it was just he didn't even take a second to think about it. He just put it in his basket, $25. Whereas I was I actually, speaking of me looking for something, I actually went and bought a physical copy of the Rise of the Empire twofer with the Tarkin and the New Dawn, which I haven't started yet because I'm lazy.
That I think that's even then, right? So you get Tarkin in Tarkin, but other than that, you don't really get any of the big principles. I mean, Kanan, right now, you could probably consider him one of the principals.
Well, and that's kind of
not to the extent that Luke and Han and Leia.
And that's kind of what I was thought. It's I'm kind of invested in that Rebels show enough where I can care where these people come from. They're not going to be gone in a flash. So I was like, I get that. But even then, I was still like, do I have a coupon for this? I was bringing up my cell phone. Can you scan my coupon?
And I'll say, the Alexander Freed wrote Twilight Company. He also wrote the script for that Uprising game and he's written for comic books and video games and various other things for a while. And I mean, it doesn't necessarily read like it's just a tossed off, like, oh, let's just put out a quickie tie-in. I think he read an interview with him where he said it took him about 6 months to write. So, it's about what one of these things should take. So, it doesn't read like a cheap quickie tie-in, but, and it's not cheap, but, it's a video game tie-in novel. And I think it also reflects the fact that they're kind of stuck now where they have this movie coming out and they have this trilogy of movies coming out where they can't really build Han and Leia and Luke into the stories that they're the books that they're putting out,
right?
Because some of that'll get revealed in the movies and in the other media, right? The comic books, I guess, is where we're getting their story. That's interesting. I just kind of put this together. So, if you really care about the principles from the original trilogy, right, the comics is where you go right now, right? The Star Wars comic, the Darth Vader comic, that's where you're getting that action.
Right.
Chewbacca, the standalones for Leia and Chewbacca and Lando, whatever. If you're interested more in kind of that general sort of EU universe building, like I want to know, that guy on the side of the screen in Empire Strikes Back who doesn't have a line, but he's just standing there. I want to know what his story is, or hey, the people who were flying the shuttle that delivered Darth Vader to the Death Star in Return of the Jedi. Like, I want to know their story.
Right.
Stuff like that. If that's what interests you, then the novels then you should be reading the novels.
See, and that's the thing. There's only one real dude I want to know his backstory.
Right.
I want to know that guy.
But it's interesting to me that they're not, right, there's not any crossover there. There are no real comic books other than maybe you could argue Shattered Empire, right? There are no comics where it's just like, okay, I want to build up the backstory of this extra who doesn't have any lines, right? And even then, Shattered Empire is essentially about Poe Dameron, who we're learning about in the movies, right? So there are no stories being told in the comics right now that are like Lost Stars or like this novel or Tarkin or Lords of the Sith or anything like that. Just as there are no novels coming out that are like, oh, here's what Han Solo was up to for in between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, or there are no novels that are like, oh, here's an adventure that Chewbacca had on his own. There's nothing like that, and so I don't know that they necessarily intended to kind of. I guess aggregate is the right word. I don't know whether they intended to kind of partition off the different kinds of stories into the different media the way that they have, but in essence, that's what they've done.
Right. Like I said, I really want to know what the dude with the sideburns and the mustache, but the ice cream maker on Cloud City. I want to know what his story is.
Maybe since Aftermath spends some time on Cloud City, maybe we'll get his story in the rest of the Aftermath trilogy.
It's like I got off Cloud City with my ice cream maker. Now I just need to find some rock salt.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
that's Twilight Company. For folks who are super into like that kind of EU universe building, I want the stories of all of the minor, characters I didn't even know their name, and now they have this huge story, and it adds to my appreciation of Star Wars. Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty good book in that sense. It's well written enough, or it's written well enough. But yeah, if you're interested in like, I want to read about Luke Skywalker saving the galaxy again, or I want to read Han Solo being his roguish self, like this probably isn't the book for you.
Right. So we're kind of at a crossroads here. So do we go into Rebels, or do we say
no? Why don't we hold off on Rebels? Because I think a lot of what we have to say, at least a lot of what I have to say this week, I think will apply equally after the next episode.
Right. So I guess we can do that. And then it'll give us a way to kind of, so I don't have to go off on a 20-minute tangent about spoilers next week. We can just talk, we can just talk about Rebels next week or whenever, if we're doing it next week, if we're going to skip. I don't think we haven't decided if are we going to be here next week, or are we going to go, we going to take
we can do next week.
We can take okay. So by that time I'll have played some Battlefront, so I can give my review. I guess that's about it, huh? Should we just wrap up?
Yeah.
Okay. You can. What? This has been a weird episode. I'll be honest. I was kind of like, I wonder if I should even do this, because I was kind of feeling frantic before.
Yeah.
Like I said, I had to move the whole show and reinstall all the programs I used to make the show onto another computer before we started talking, and it's just kind of, hence I'm being. And now my dog's crying at me because she has to go potty. She's like, wrap it up.
I guess that's a good sign that we should wrap this up.
Yeah. So you can, concerns about my mental health, complaints about my mental health, you can interact with us at Talking Birdcast on Twitter. You can, if you're interested in playing Battlefront with me, maybe you can, at reply me, and we can figure out how to add. I don't know. I tend to play online just by myself, Yeah. But if you really, really want to play Battlefront with a jackass with a podcast, let me know. You can email us at it's talkingbirdcast@gmail.com. There's Facebook. You can like us or fan us, or it's facebook.com/ I'm actually in front of a computer. I can do this. Talking Bird Podcast. And then does it come up? That's us. That's our page.
That's our show.
That's our show. And you can also go to our Tumblr at www.talkingbirdStarWars.tumblr.com, and John has put up some images that he liked from Rebels, and I think something from
just stuff to talk about image-wise. I thought about putting up some text of my my Twilight Company review, but I think that much text doesn't really work in the Tumblr formats. So,
I have found that myself, being an old. We all did this together when we were.
People just use Tumblr to post photos and videos now anyway. So
yes, not so great with the fake news stories about rock bands, but much better with pictures.
Yeah.
I think that's about it. Like I said, sorry for the weird episode. I'm kind of.
Don't apologize, Robert. It is what it is. It's what people get sometimes.
Exactly. For Talking Birdcast, I have been Robert Zachary.
And I remain John Llewellyn.
Good day, and may the Force be with you.
How sweet to be an idiot, as harmless as a cloud, too small to hide the sun, almost poking fun at the warm but insecure, untidy crowd. How sweet to be an idiot and dip my brain in joy. Children laughing at my back with no fear of attack, as much retaliation as a toy. How sweet to be an idiot. How sweet. I tiptoed down the street, smile at everyone I meet. But suddenly a scream smashes through my dream. Fee, fi, fo, fo, I smell the blood of an asylum. Blood of an asylum? But mother, I'm playing so beautifully. Aha, listen, aha. Fee, fi, fo, fo, I smell the blood of an asylum. Hey you're such a pedant. You got as much brain as a dead ant, as much imagination as a caravan sight. But I still love you, still love you. How sweet to be an idiot. How sweet.